Over the next 30 days, things were quiet, almost as if we were given a reprieve, a break from all the craziness. During that time, my wife and son spent a lot of time with Liz, and she asked me to mentor her grandson. She told me about his life. His father, her son-in-law, was arrested for attempt murder of the man who tried to rape his mother, her daughter. This happened in Little Rock. His father gets arrested for attempted murder. Then her daughter was overcome with what she called a spirit of guilt. Her eyes watered as she explained it all. She prayed, tried to pray that spirit off of her, but her daughter wouldn't let it go. Yas, short for Yasmina, just couldn't accept the fact that she couldn't have done anything different to prevent that wicked man from trying to rape her. Then one day, she saw him out on the streets, free, and her husband in prison. So she went to the car, got a gun, and shot him in the head in broad daylight, mafia style, walked right up behind him. Then she went home to be with her son and waited. When the police came, they took her, leaving the grandson with her and Frank. Well, I started to spend time with her grandson, and you could tell he was yearning for male attention, just someone to talk to. Now he had to get over the fact that I was white and that I was an ex-cop. However, after we got past that point, he and I hit it off well. That's when he opened up one day. We were at my house in the back. He was helping me with the lawn mower when he said, "You know what? I think these things in the woods, they want you to treat them like they are the boss, you know? They all seem the same to me. They want us humans to be afraid and fall down shaking in front of them, and when we don't, it confuses them." Warren went on to tell me this story about when he was 14 years old, and he and his grandfather went into the woods looking for their dog. The dog had been barking all morning, broke the chain, and took off into the woods. His grandpa, Frank, loved that dog, so they went looking. According to Warren, they walked for miles before they found him, and when they did, he was hiding inside a downed tree trunk. He said Frank knew where the dog was because they followed the growling and commotion coming from the woods. They could hear the dog barking and the sound of the chain. When they got there, they realized these creatures had chased the dog inside the log and had been rolling the log around. He said that's when Frank got angry, commanded them to show themselves. He said the leaf litter started to move, and it was like these creatures came out of the earth itself, and two of these big brown wolves stood there less than 30 yards away. Frank told them they had no right to mess with his dog, that they were legally in violation, and then he commanded them to leave. One turned and walked away, but the other just stood there looking, staring at him like it wanted to kill him. According to Warren, this was the most intense standoff he had ever been involved in. They just looked at each other for minutes before Frank said, "Get going before I call for backup." The wolf looked up towards the sky and then turned and walked away. When I asked him what he meant by backup, Warren said he never really understood it, but his grandpa told him that there were angels that would come if he called for them. When I asked him if he ever saw one, he said no. However, he did say he witnessed what looked like flashes of lights going through the woods when Grandpa would go out at night to confront them. Warren described it as lightning that went horizontally, burning trees and all. The next day, he took me to the trees on the backside of their property and showed me the trees he talked about. This was an entire set of trees still alive with holes through the middle of them. If you looked through the first, you could see where this energy hit and went straight through each of them, looking from one hole to the next. This was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Over the next few days, a sense of peace began to settle in as my wife and Liz grew closer, and my wife and I had more time to ourselves since Liz would babysit our son. She said it was important that the two of us keep a strong relationship. I can't recall the exact day, but it was early August when the activity started again. This time it was different. It was explosive. Have you ever seen trees swaying in the wind? How the treetops move with the wind? Well, imagine seeing them move back and forth without any wind and without any sound. That's what started to happen in the daytime, trees swinging in the woods behind the house with no wind and no sound. It was as if the trees were dancing, but it was when the sun went down that the really weird stuff started to happen. I could feel it in the air. It felt like a storm was approaching, but there were no storm clouds and no wind. Yet the air was electric, filled with this static. and I could sense that something was coming. What made it worse was this urging to go outside and face it. You know that feeling guys get when your bladder is full, how you feel swollen. It's not so much pain, but an aching to urinate. That's the same feeling I had in my gut, an aching feeling, as if something had to come out. It started early, around 8 p.m., when I heard my name being called from outside. It sounded like a man calling me, but the tone was authoritative, like a father calling a son. Come outside. Come outside right now. When I got outside, no one was there. To be clear, there was no person there, but something was. As I'm standing there, this light starts to move in the trees. It looked like a cell phone light, just a square, rectangular light, darting back and forth as if it were searching. Then it gets to this spot and brightens up, illuminating the entire area almost like a spotlight. This was the first time I saw one of the wolves. It was crouched low to the ground, moving in my direction like a lion stalking prey. What was even weirder was that it seemed unaware of the fact that it was completely lit up. It just kept stalking and moving slowly, its eyes locked on me. It was in that moment that I knew it saw me as prey. I'm not sure why I said this, but the words just came out. I can see you. It stopped moving and looked around as if it understood what I was saying. Then it started again. I said, I can see you. I don't know what you think is going to happen, but in a few minutes, I'm going back inside to get my shotgun and I'm going to shoot you in the face. Listen, this thing stops and slowly stands up. Watching this smooth motion, I understood how they could sneak up on people. There was no sound whatsoever as it moved. Now it's standing, every bit of 8 feet tall, looking directly at me. I think it realized that I could see it. Again, it's oblivious to the bright light suspended above it, and I'm looking at this thing in its eyes. Then it growls. This was different from the sound I heard before. This growl was like a spear. I felt it hit my body. It growled, then waited, and I said, Look, I can see you. Stay right there. I'll be back. As I started to back up towards the house, it felt like I was walking in water. Every motion was heavy and laborious. I grabbed the shotgun and walked back right up to the wood line, now 15 yards away from me. It wasn't until I raised the shotgun and pointed it directly at this thing's head that it realized I could actually see it. It looked at the shotgun, then at my eyes, and a look of confusion came over its face like, this one is different. And then it turned and walked away. I want to be clear, it did not flee like it was afraid of me. It gave me its back and walked off, as if to say, I dare you to do something humane. After that night, I believe I was now fully on their radar, because we all went through this intense period of being watched. Now, this is the craziest part about the months I called the watching hours. It didn't matter where we were. By we, I mean my wife and I. If there was a patch of woods, brush, or trees, they were there. How that happens, I have no clue. But what I can tell you is this. When these things watch you, you can feel it. And they don't hide the fact that they are watching you. That was the most confusing thing about it all. Until Liz explained it to me one evening. She and Warren were at the house for dinner, and I asked her if she had ever seen the wolves watching her and Frank when they were not at home. She laughed and said, oh yes, they studied us like we were their homework. Looking for weaknesses is what they do. They studied Frank and me for over a year. Then they made their move. Yes, it was all about Frank, though. Everything was designed to scare my poor Frank. What they didn't know was all they did was piss him off even more. That led to a fire. He tried to burn them out of their home because they tried to run us out of ours. The worst part about all the watching was that it felt like they had all the time in the world, like time was on their side. And they knew it. We had stuff we needed to do, burdens of just being human, the busyness of life. But for these creatures, we were their business. I will say this, during that time period it was relatively peaceful. Not much craziness happened, at least to any of us. However, there was a period when all hell broke loose in the woods. Warren called it the rumble in the woods. I remember that day. Our families had reached the point where we had keys to each other's houses. It was 9 a.m. Saturday morning, and I heard the front door open and Warren's voice saying, "Hey, you guys awake?" 30 minutes later, we were outside in the back by the woods, and he said, "Listen, they will be fighting soon." All I heard was what sounded like birds singing, but the singing was off. According to Warren, whenever you hear those sounds, the fake bird sounds, it's the Bigfoot moving through the area. He said that Frank explained to him that this is when the fighting always starts. I'm standing there confused when he says, "Let's go see." I'm like, "See what?" "See if they have been fighting yet." Now pause, I want you to understand at this point, I had seen so much I was desensitized to almost anything. So we went into the woods and he explains to me that we are looking for signs where the game has stampeded and left the area. It was at this point that I learned how much of a true menace Warren actually was, because we are walking through the woods, and this is way before I understood what the signs of Bigfoot were in the woods, like the tree structures, the twisted limbs, and Warren is just messing with stuff. He walks over to these 3 trees that were neatly arranged and says, "See this? It's a Bigfoot marker to let the wolves know they are here and not to come any further." Then he gets a running start and rams into it, knocking it over. Looks at me and says, "That will help get the party started." We move further and come to this trail. He stops, looks, and says, "Oh, they have been hunting over here already. The wolves are not going to like this." Then he walks over and shows me this blind right off the trail, an ambush spot, less than 5 feet from the trail, filled with wax myrtle plants. He picks up a handful of that and starts to walk up the trail. As we are walking, just casually talking, he says, "We might want to step off this trail. Sounds like something is coming." He pulls me to the side, and we stand there. I can hear movements off in the distance, and it closes on us in seconds. And it's deer. They are hauling ass, 25 in a row, leaping and bounding. You know it's some weird stuff happening when a deer runs past you and looks at you like you're crazy, like Bambi from a cartoon, like, "Stupid human, don't you see us running?" You might want to run. Now remember, I told you Warren is a menace. After these deer pass, he says, "Seems like they are all hunting." He turns around, goes back to that blind, and crawls in and comes out with these wet leaves that smelled to me like 15 gallons of urine. He just starts to toss them all over the trail. Then he looks at me with this mischievous grin and says, "Well, there will be no more flushing game down this trail, so they will have to switch to their ground game and hunt at night. This is the main trail in this area. Now they will all have to hunt together at night until it starts to rain." Listen, we got back to my house and Warren starts to set lawn chairs out in the backyard. My wife and I are like, "Yeah, what are you doing?" He says, "No worries, y'all go do what needs to be done. I'm just preparing for later tonight." He has gone to the shed and gotten a little table, gets bottles of water, sets up this comfortable area, then says, "I'll come back later tonight." My wife is like, "Warren, we are not going to be up late tonight messing around with those things." He just looks and says, "I know you don't want to be up, but you kind of don't have a choice." Then he leaves the house. Fast forward to 7 p.m. We were having dinner when Warren knocks and comes in through the front door, sitting down at the table. He and my wife start talking, and he's visibly excited. She asks, "Warren, what is about to happen?" And he replies, "Trust me, you don't want to go to sleep. You have to hear this." We finish dinner and he takes her outside, showing her the comfortable spot he had set up for her, complete with a lawn chair, pillow, and blanket. By this time, Warren had started treating my wife like the mother he never had, and he was very protective of her. At the same time, he would listen to what she said and follow it. It was like having an older son that didn't live in the house, so now we were all outside just talking when we start to hear those birds again. They were bird sounds, but too deep to be birds, and Warren says they are hunting. He goes on to explain the sounds, and it was like we were given a key to a secret language of the woods. When the fake birds started, all other normal sounds of the woods stopped. No crickets, nothing. Warren says, "Okay, it's just a matter of time before it starts because there's no way they can all hunt in the same area." He reminisces about the last time they all fought. The woods looked like a tornado hit. Then he changes the subject. and starts to talk about this book he and my wife were both reading. She had introduced him to Resurrection Bay, a book about a deaf detective. My wife tried to get me to read it, but I just couldn't get into it. Like, how are you going to solve a crime when you can't hear? It was just too much for me. Picture the scene. The two of them are geeking out about the book, and I'm getting up because now my wife, who wanted to go to bed, asks for a glass of wine. I'm thinking, well, I'll be damned. The two nerds are having a book club meeting. When I get to the back door, it starts. This yell, man, it sounds like a blowhorn going off. Warren says that's a sentinel telling the rest he spotted something dangerous. Then you hear this whooping from all over the place, and he's giving us a play-by-play. They're sounding off now, letting each other know where they are. Then it goes quiet, dead silent, for like 5 minutes. I go inside, get the wine, come back out, and sit down. Now my wife is all into it, asking, why is it quiet? Warren explains it's kind of a standoff. They're giving each other a chance to leave. There have been times this happened and then nothing else. Other times, all hell breaks loose. It was like nature, all of nature, was waiting for a response, and when it came, it sounded like a T-Rex dinosaur responded from way off in the distance. Then it was on. Growling, whooping, trees breaking off in the distance. Then we started to hear stuff near us moving, coming down the ridge to the west of us, and Warren said, "Now the big boys are coming. Cover your ears." Listen, there is this growl that converts to a scream, then to a roar, all in the same breath. And for the next 4 days, when the sun went down, it sounded like a war was happening in the woods and hills behind us. There was no sleeping during that period. There would be these brief pauses in the action where you'd fall asleep for a few hours, and then it would sound like a tree was being ripped in half and thrown. This entire time, we had another neighbor who was super standoffish. Frankly, he was weird and rubbed me the wrong way. Never spoke, but always was eyeing my wife. Warren said he never liked the man ever since he was a kid. Our meeting him was almost as violent as the fighting going on in the woods.